welcome to the Houston Zoo. Happy National Zookeepers Week. My name is Stephanie and I've been working here for a little over the year, and this is...
Hi, I'm Tim. I've started in November here working at the Houston Zoo, and we're here today with our whooping cranes. You might see Haydn hanging out over here. Angel is also in the exhibit. These are our whooping cranes. These are one of the most endangered species of birds in the world. Back in the 1940s, there were only in the 20s left, but today we've rebounded a little bit and we're up into the 800s.
And today what we're giving them is a little bit of enrichment items. So we have, if you want to look, we have some nice crickets and peanuts, and we also have some mealworms. So we're giving them enrichment. They are live feeding, so it gives them a little bit of work for their food, as they would do in the wild. And as you can see, they really, really love their enrichment. Now the way you can tell them apart is we have Angel and Haydn. Haydn is right there on the left, and he does not have a band on his leg, but Angel does have a band on the left leg. And that's kind of a sort of a way where we identify the cranes and see which one is which. There you guys go.
Yeah, so you might find these birds naturally living out in Texas wetlands just like this one. These birds can be natively found in Texas, as well as migratory to Wisconsin, Canada, Florida, and some populations down in Louisiana. And this is kind of a natural behavior for them. You know, they've got these long legs, a long probing bill so they can poke around into the water. They're omnivores, so they'll eat, plant matter as well as animal matter as well. They really like these crickets, but they also really like these peanuts as well. They might eat greens.
Sometimes we try other enrichment, like in the wild they would, there's something that's based on how they eat blue crabs, especially around Texas. So we did try that one day with our whooping cranes, but they didn't seem too interested in the whooping cranes. Into the blue crab. In fact, they were actually scared of blue crab, which is crazy because whooping cranes usually survive on that stuff here in Texas. But that can correlate to just because they are mostly Wisconsin bound, so they come from us from over there and not from the Texas plains. But these guys have been paired together for about 8 years. And they are with us and not part of the Whooping Crane Foundation or the breeding program because they both did have reproductive problems, which is okay because they came here and now they are ambassadors to their wild counterparts to show you how beautiful these cranes are and make you want to come to the zoo to save them.
So both of these birds are about middle-aged. They're 14 and 15 years old, and in managed care, they can live into their 30s. Out in the wild, they might live into their early 20s. But they definitely are nice and comfortable, get all sorts of different kinds of enrichment to encourage natural behavior. And they've got this beautiful space out here, so we can fly a little bit in here. We've got beaches, we've got all sorts of different plants they might try to forage through. And you might even see, if you take a very careful look, you might see fish swimming down in our wetlands down here. There's some little sunfish swimming down through the waters down here, all through the whole Texas wetlands here.
We do want to create that natural looking of Texas wetlands. If you come visit our Texas wetlands exhibit, we want to make it as close as possible to what we would see out there in Texas. And Lily is asking, why is their beak so long? Well, that's pretty much how they naturally adapted to the wild through years of evolution, and now their beak is used for just pillaging into just the Texas wetlands or into the ground to kind of get their invertebrates that they need, or any mammals or reptiles that they might want to dig through. So that's a good way to dig and sort through just Texas wetland marsh.
Yeah, especially with those crabs that you were just mentioning as a part of their natural behavior to root out crabs, deep underneath the substrate. That might be something kind of hard to pull out if their beak was very short, but with that long beak, they're very good at that.
And as you can see, they can reach the bottom right there with that long beak to get those crickets out, or the mealworms that do sink to the bottom, without wetting their feathers on the head. And if you look at their feathers, yes, they are in the water and sometimes they get them really wet. We did have a little bit of rain this morning and we had rain throughout the week, but they don't look soaked. And that's because the cranes, or a lot of birds in general around wet habitats, have this sort of waterproof feathers that help the water pretty much roll off those feathers. And we have Destiny asking, how do you keep them from flying away? Well, we actually, for a lot of our birds, they do have a quick trim of the wing, and that they do fly around this enclosure. But we do trim the wing. It would be like you were cutting your hair. It's just a little trim off the bottom of your hair or the bottom of their wing to allow them to not fly so high. And so we do have this netting, and we trim the wing so that they don't hit their heads on the netting. So we do have a nice trim of the wing for them. But of course, the netting is a natural barrier for them as well for not flying away. And then Isabella asks, how do they sleep? You want to answer that, Tim?
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do they sleep? They naturally just sleep pretty much standing up. We have seen them on the floor with their legs kind of just curved in like flamingos. But mostly we've seen them standing up, and it's just a natural behavior just to avoid predators. If they're on the ground, then it takes them a lot of energy to stand up. So if they're standing up already and there's a predator around, they can already run away.
I think we have a few more questions. So Phoebe is asking, what else do they eat? So things like we might give them greens, we might give them lettuce for kind of a foraging thing. We feed them a pelleted diet for everything nutritionally, just to make sure that they get all the different kinds of nutrients that a water bird like this might need. What other kind of enrichment items might you give them?
Pretty much we give them sometimes cranberries or different kinds of berries. We try to just give them a variety of things that they would find in the wild. Sometimes it's a hit or miss with these cranes though, because they are very picky sometimes and they eat what they want to eat, and that's it, and we're not going to argue with that.
Yeah, I think in the past we've seen if they're very careful, they might try to get some of the little fish naturally living right out here. But they're pretty quick. They're pretty difficult to catch. So Zaya is asking, are they related to flamingos? A little bit, not very closely related, but they are water birds and they do look very similar, right? Kind of long legs, but those flamingos have more of a kind of a filter feeding mouth, and they're not quite in the same crane family as these birds.
The only reason I mentioned flamingos is just because of those long legs and how they'll bend in to lie down. And that's kind of the similarity that we have. But nah, they're pretty far out.
Yeah, they're very similar in natural behavior, though, with those long legs, like you were mentioning, kind of the way they might sleep.
Dawn is asking, where in Texas can we see them in the wild? Well, one of my favorite places to go is Aransas National Wildlife Refuge. And that's pretty much where I saw them. You can hear them by their loud call. It kind of sounds like a trumpet. So that's why in Spanish they're called grulla trompetera, and that Spanish for trumpet is kind of like their call if you were in band and all the trumpets are trying to reach that high C or above. That's pretty much how loud their call is. But yeah, you'll find them in the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge.
Right here on the Gulf.
Bend, and you probably might have see them flying over throughout Houston as they make their way to those areas.
It's definitely a very long migration, so that pathway, you might see them all the way up to Canada. So Ava is asking, how did they get their names and do they whoop? So occasionally I'll hear them whoop, especially if there's something unusual going on. Maybe there's a large group of people coming through, or they might see some contractors behind their enclosure. They made an alarm call, let everyone know, hey, there's something kind of scary over here. Hey, watch out. But they got their names from Wisconsin athletes, I believe, right? They were both hatched at the International Crane Foundation in Wisconsin, and they got their names from famous Wisconsin native athletes.
As you can see, they're very attentive and they're always watching everything around them, construction, people. They just want to make sure everything is okay before they do look for food. Catherine asks, do they mate for life? Yes, they do form the pair bonds. So these were pair bonded for about 8 years, and in the wild you'll see groups with pair bonds to do the mating rituals. You can see they're very fond of each other. They're always together pretty much. You might see one wandering, but at most they'll be pretty much together just like you see here.
Yeah, you might even see preening between each other, you know, where they're cleaning each other's feathers.
You can tell they can eat forever. They do love those trees.
Definitely. So Sean is asking, are they endangered? And these birds are definitely an endangered species. You know, today there are only about 850 whooping cranes in the world, but back in the 1940s, they were into the low 20s. I believe it was 21 managed, and two outside of that, it was 23 total. So they were quite critical. They're one of the most endangered birds in the whole country. But I'm really glad that they've been able to make that much of a recovery since then, and hopefully we'll be able to stay in this positive trend.
Yeah, and that just shows the amazing work that zoos do, and kind of the coordination they do from Canada to Wisconsin to someplace like Houston Zoo and San Antonio Zoo, where we try to get those pairs breeding and naturally release them into the wild to create those kind of numbers that we are seeing an upward trend. So it's a great program that zoos are into in helping repopulate pretty much Texas and Wisconsin all the way to Canada.
Yeah, that sustainable population.
I think some of the fish are trying to get the mealworms.
Oh, definitely.
And now they have multiplied.
So I think a minute ago I saw a question about how tall they were. So when these birds are standing up straight, they're about 5 feet tall. So these are, you know, the tallest species of bird in the country. Those legs are probably about 1.5 feet. So these are definitely pretty big birds. They're not very heavy though, which kind of helps them be able to still fly despite being so big.
You see those long beaks sometimes get in the way, so they have to look a little bit sideways to try to see where the enrichment landed. And sometimes they can see straight, but for better vision, they can see from sideways to avoid the beak getting in the way. And we want to go ahead and thank you for joining us. We hope you guys enjoy our Plastic-Free July especially. Make sure to protect stuff like the whooping crane. You can go ahead and use reusable straws, reusable masks, little things that you can do, reusable bags, little things that you can do to just help the environment, especially help the whooping crane since they are a Texas bird. That's stuff that you can contribute to the Houston Zoo. And also, we want to ask, if you guys have any contributions to the Houston Zoo, we would greatly appreciate it because by making a contribution to the Houston Zoo, you contribute to helping save birds like the whooping cranes. And we hope you guys have a great day and happy Zookeepers Week.
Zookeeper Week. Thank you, everybody.